Well, I think everybody knows by now this is a very remote site. It's 1,500 miles to the east of the United States, the east coast. It's about 350 miles south of St. John's in Newfoundland. And of course, the Titanic lies at a depth of nearly 4,000 meters. Apart from going into space, you couldn't get in a much more remote site. The problems you have is that you have a tiny vehicle. It's only about 21 feet long. It's on the bottom somewhere. It's amongst the debris of Titanic itself. The seabed is undulating. The Titanic wreck itself lies in a canyon. So actually finding this is going to be really difficult, a bit like a needle in a haystack.
And in terms of the immediate fear, Chris, is it running out of oxygen?
From what we've heard, it's got about 4 days worth of oxygen, so they said 96 hours. My concern is that the safety beacon that transmits every 20 minutes gave up, I think, after an hour and 45 minutes into the dive. That's suggestive of itself. There's no emergency beacon whatsoever been sort of heard at all. So finding this thing is going to be really difficult. I'm normally optimistic, but I have to tell you, in these circumstances, it's very worrying indeed.
If a rescue was to be made, what are we talking about? Getting another submersible down near where they are and transferring the people out, or would you have to bring the Titan back to the surface somehow? What would be the process to rescue the 5 passengers?
It's a really good question. We're in unknown territory here. You can't possibly put another vehicle over the top of it and get the people out at that depth. The vessel has to be brought to the surface, and the only 2 options you've really got are essentially putting a hawser down to it and putting it around the thing and dragging it to the surface with a crane. And one of the rescue craft I see has got a crane like that, but the difficulties of putting a wire down that far, we're talking about miles here, and then actually dragging the thing up are pretty remote. The only other option is to deploy a similar submersible which has grabbing arms that you can put on the front of it, and then, if you like, just hug the stricken vessel and bring it to the surface in a sort of piggyback fashion. But I must emphasize, these vessels are essentially kit cars. They're not normal submarines. They're built in an experimental way, and this particular one is, shall we say, built from components that you can get off the internet from Amazon. So they're very flimsy, they're very fragile, and you can't allow a lot to go wrong before you're in danger.
Well, I guess that raises separate questions at how these excursions were allowed to take place at great cost as well, according to reports, but that's perhaps a debate for another day. Also just wondering whether there's a chance that this is on the surface. I read one report, in fact, it wasn't a very hopeful report, suggesting that if it had come up to the surface, it wouldn't have been by choice and perhaps could have happened too fast. But I guess it's just as hard looking on the ocean floor to try and find this as it would be if it were somewhere on the surface, or do we know that it's not?
Well, I think if it were on the surface, it would have been found by now. There's been a maritime patrol aircraft, very sophisticated Air Force aircraft looking for any sign of this. Now, the sort of sensors they've got can pick up sort of rubber dinghies and things like that. So had it come to the surface within about even up to sort of 50 miles of the site, it would have been found by now, I would have suspected. And you're absolutely right. The only way that people could have survived an initial problem is if they'd dropped their weights, which they have on the side of the thing, and used their compressed air to get to the surface. I haven't seen any evidence that that has happened. And I think the odds are that the vessel is still at depth and either needs rescuing or I'm afraid to say, has reached a sticky end.